Well, it is Thursday, everybody, and that means Dr. Caroline Heldman, professor of critical theory and social justice at Occidental College, is here to break down the week's political headlines. Good morning to you. Great to have you with us, as always.
Wonderful to see you, Melvin.
So, hard to believe, 1 year later, after the outrageous insurrection that happened on January 6th. Caroline, what has stuck out to you the most as you reflect over the last year?
Well, I would say that I think we're actually in a worse place when it comes to democracy and the threat than we were a year ago. Fueled by the big lie, 19 states have actually limited their voting rights unnecessarily. And also, I think maybe the most troubling thing that stuck out to me since January 6th is the idea that this extreme idea that we should use violence to handle our political disputes has actually moved mainstream. We now see 1 in 3 Republicans and 1 in 5 Democrats embracing the idea that violence is possibly the way to handle our political disputes. So while I reflect back on January 6th and the threat that it posed to our democracy, I think what has happened since and the fact that we haven't really reckoned with this threat has made the threat to our democracy even worse than it was a year ago.
You know, Nancy Pelosi said that on that day, on January 6th, our nation was on the brink of catastrophe. How dire was that moment? And I mean, obviously, you still think we're in that dire moment.
I do. I think it's more subtle now. And so we don't have these images in front of us that are shocking us that we can push back against and condemn. It's happening more slowly. But on that day, I just remember the trauma and thinking we now have hundreds of people who have been traumatized and hoping that they have gotten the mental health care that they needed since that day. I also think it's important to remember that no one is a villain in their own story. So as we think about where our nation is and the division, if you're a viewer and you're thinking, you know, that you hate the other side or you don't understand why they don't believe what you do, really dig into that and try to understand how it is that we are in the place that we are, because it's a massive misinformation campaign, right? The big lie is really fueling this, and really understanding that and our role in rejecting it is really the core of maintaining our democracy.
Before we let you go here this morning, Caroline, one of my favorite quotes is from the musical Hamilton. You know, history has its eyes on us. How will history regard us in this moment, would you say?
I think that history will look back to determine whether or not we held on to our democracy. And I know that sounds dire and perhaps hyperbolic, but every historian I know, I study American history, we're really on the brink of moving into authoritarianism if we don't recognize the threat that the division in our country is posing to our democracy. It's being fueled by social media. It's perhaps being fueled, you know, by foreign powers who want chaos in our country. It's being fueled by extremism, and we need to shut that down. We need to recognize it as a threat it is and shut it down in our everyday lives.
All right, Caroline, thank you so much, as always, for being with us.
Thank you.
We always value your perspective
Absolutely.
and your insights. And we go now, everybody, to our live national coverage marking 1 year since the historic attacks on our nation's capital.